A 14-year-old girl vanishes days before her birthday. No signs of a struggle. No forced entry. Just an open window, and a note left behind. Then nothing. For 4 years, she simply didn't exist. Until one night, she walked into a tiny police station and said, "I'm the girl who went missing." Before we dive deep into this incredible journey, if you're passionate about true crime stories that don't just scratch the surface but take you through every twist and turn, hit that like button right now, smash the subscribe button for Cold Case Model, and drop a comment telling us what unsolved case keeps you up at night. We're here to bring you the most compelling missing person cases and cold case investigations, and your support means everything. Now, let's begin. Picture a quiet suburban neighborhood in Glendale, Arizona, just on the outskirts of Phoenix. It's the kind of place where families live their everyday lives, where you hear the sounds of school drop-offs in the morning, the smell of weekend barbecues drifting through the air, children's laughter echoing as they play in front yards. It's a community where neighbors know each other by name, where doors might still be left unlocked during the day because people feel safe. Trust is woven into the fabric of the community. But in September 2019, one family in that neighborhood would face a nightmare that would forever alter the course of their lives. Alicia Navarro was born in 2004. By the fall of 2019, she was 14 years old, just days away from celebrating her 15th birthday on September 20th. She lived with her mother, Jessica Nuñez, and other family members in a modest home in Glendale. Those who knew Alicia described her as a bright, creative young girl with a deep passion for art and music. She loved spending time online, connecting with friends through social media and gaming platforms. She had been diagnosed with mild autism, which sometimes presented challenges in social situations, made reading certain social cues a bit more difficult, but she was independent in many ways and had a strong, vibrant personality that those around her came to know and love. On the morning of September 15, 2019, everything appeared normal at first. The sun rose over Glendale like it did every other day. The household went through its usual morning rhythms. But when Jessica went to check on her daughter, her world came crashing down. Alicia was gone. The window in her bedroom was open, the curtains moving slightly in the breeze, and there was something left behind on her bed, something that would haunt Jessica for years to come. A handwritten note. The note read something along the lines of, "I ran away. I will be back. I swear." It was signed by Alicia in her own handwriting. Jessica's heart must have stopped in that moment. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken glass. No struggle. No immediate evidence that anyone had taken her daughter against her will. The window was simply open, as if Alicia had climbed out into the early morning darkness. At that moment, the family realized this appeared to be a voluntary departure, at least from Alicia's perspective, at least according to the note she left behind. But what 14-year-old girl just leaves like that? What would make her run away just days before her 15th birthday? Jessica immediately called the police. Her hands were probably shaking as she dialed 911, her voice breaking as she tried to explain that her daughter was missing. Officers from the Glendale Police Department arrived quickly and began treating it as a missing juvenile case. They took statements, photographed the note, examined the open window. Because Alicia was under 18 and had left a note indicating she was leaving on her own, it was initially classified as a runaway situation rather than an abduction. In law enforcement terms, this distinction matters. It affects how resources are allocated, how urgently the case is pursued in those critical first hours. But the family never believed it was that simple. A mother knows her child. And Jessica knew something was wrong. Jessica later shared in interviews how deeply worried she was from that very first moment. She was concerned that her daughter might have been influenced or encouraged by someone she'd met online. Alicia spent considerable time on social media, on gaming platforms, in chat rooms, talking to people she'd encountered there, people the family might never have met, people whose real identities might have been hidden behind screen names and profile pictures. The question that haunted Jessica was simple and terrifying: had someone groomed her daughter? Had someone spent weeks or months building trust with Alicia, convincing her to leave, to run away, to meet them somewhere? Within hours of the initial report, the case escalated. The Glendale Police Department notified the Federal Bureau of Investigation because of the potential for online exploitation or interstate travel. These are common concerns in runaway cases involving teenagers who are active online. The internet has no borders. A predator in another state, or even another country, can communicate with a vulnerable young person as easily as someone in the same neighborhood. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, known as NCMEC, was also brought in early, adding their considerable resources to help spread the word. NCMEC specializes in these cases, helping law enforcement agencies coordinate efforts, distributing information to the public, maintaining databases that can track patterns and connections across state lines. Alicia's description was entered into national databases. 5 feet 3 inches tall, around 110 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes. They noted any distinctive features, anything that might help someone recognize her. The clothing she might have been wearing that night was documented. A simple outfit, perhaps jeans and a hoodie, nothing flashy, nothing that would make her stand out in a crowd. And that was part of what made finding her so difficult. The search began immediately. Police canvassed the neighborhood, going door to door, speaking to neighbors, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual that night or early that morning. Had anyone heard voices? Seen a car they didn't recognize? Noticed anything at all out of the ordinary? They checked nearby parks, schools, and bus stops. Every place a 14-year-old might go if they were running away, if they were scared, if they were meeting someone. They reviewed any available surveillance footage from homes or businesses in the area. In 2019, doorbell cameras and home security systems were becoming more common, but coverage wasn't universal. Detectives spent hours reviewing grainy footage, looking for any sign of Alicia, any vehicle that might have picked her up, any clue that could point them in the right direction. But nothing definitive emerged. No clear image of Alicia leaving. No suspicious vehicle caught on camera. Nothing. Flyers were printed and distributed, thousands of them, showing Alicia's photo, her age, her description, and the contact number for tips. Her face appeared on telephone poles, in store windows, on community bulletin boards. Volunteers helped distribute them across Glendale and into neighboring communities. The family held press conferences, standing before cameras and microphones, pleading for information, pleading for their daughter to come home. Jessica spoke emotionally about her daughter, her voice cracking with the weight of fear and love. She said things like, "She's my baby, and I just want her home safe. Please, if anyone knows anything, anything at all, please call. Please help us bring her home." The media coverage was immediate. Local news stations in Phoenix ran the story. Alicia's face appeared on the evening news, on morning shows, on websites. The story spread beyond Arizona as national outlets picked it up. A 14-year-old girl with autism, missing, possibly meeting someone from the internet. It was every parent's worst nightmare. Over the following weeks and months, the investigation deepened and expanded. Detectives interviewed friends from school, classmates who might have noticed changes in Alicia's behavior, might have heard her mention meeting someone or planning something. They spoke with teachers, counselors, anyone who had regular contact with her. They looked into her online activity, and this became one of the most intensive parts of the investigation. Social media accounts were examined. Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever platforms Alicia had been using. Messaging apps were scrutinized. Discord, WhatsApp, Kik, platforms where young people connect and communicate, often with people they've never met in person. Gaming platforms were investigated because Alicia loved gaming, and these platforms have built-in chat functions where players can talk to each other, form friendships, build relationships. Detectives tried to trace conversations, looking for any indication of who Alicia might have been talking to, what plans might have been discussed, where she might have intended to go. This kind of digital forensics is painstaking work. Messages can be deleted. Accounts can be closed. People use fake names and temporary email addresses. The FBI assisted with this digital investigation, using their specialized tools and expertise. They subpoenaed records from platforms where Alicia had been active, requesting user data, IP addresses, timestamps, anything that might help track down who she'd been communicating with and where those communications might lead. Thousands of tips poured in from the public. The hotline set up for information about Alicia rang constantly in those early days. People calling because they thought they'd seen her, because they remembered something that might be important, because they wanted to help. Sightings were reported across Arizona and even further afield, in neighboring states, in places hundreds of miles away. Some leads seemed promising. A girl matching Alicia's description was reportedly seen at a bus station in New Mexico. Detectives followed up, reviewed security footage, interviewed station employees. It wasn't her. Another report came in from California. Someone at a youth shelter thought they recognized the girl in the photo. Investigators checked it out thoroughly. Again, not Alicia. Some tips took investigators to Texas, to Nevada, following up on reports of a girl matching her description seen at fast food restaurants, at gas stations, at places where a runaway teenager might stop. But every promising tip seemed to lead nowhere. Every possible sighting turned out to be someone else, another young woman with brown hair, another teenager who happened to be wearing similar clothing. Search teams conducted sweeps of remote areas around Glendale, places where someone might hide, where someone might be held, or worse, where remains might be found. They checked abandoned buildings, desert areas, anywhere that needed to be ruled out. These searches were thorough but yielded nothing. No evidence. No trace of Alicia. Background checks were run on known associates, people in Alicia's circle, people who might have had contact with her. Could someone she knew in real life have been involved? Could this have been planned with someone from school, from the neighborhood? Every possibility had to be explored, every avenue investigated. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, the leads dried up. The tips became less frequent. The case slowly shifted from an active search with fresh leads coming in daily to a long-term missing persons investigation. This is the hard reality of many missing person cases. The initial surge of activity, the media attention, the public interest, it all gradually fades. Life goes on for everyone except the family left behind. The Glendale Police Department kept the file open. This was important. Alicia's case remained active, not relegated to some dustbin of forgotten cases. Detectives continued working on it, though without new leads, there was only so much they could do. They periodically released updates to the media, keeping Alicia's story in the public eye, hoping that someone, somewhere, might remember something, might come forward with information they'd been holding on to. They worked closely with organizations like NCMEC to create age-progressed photos. These are computer-generated images showing what Alicia might look like as she grew older. If she was still out there, she wouldn't look 14 forever. As months passed, she'd be 15, then 16. Would someone recognize her if they saw what she might look like now? These age-progressed images were distributed widely, added to missing person databases, shared on social media. Jessica Nuñez became a tireless advocate for her missing daughter. And this is where the story becomes as much about a mother's love as it is about a missing child. As the initial shock of Alicia's disappearance settled into a painful routine, the years from late 2019 through 2023 became a long, quiet chapter of waiting, hoping, and holding on. For Jessica Nuñez and the rest of the family, every single day without news felt like another reminder of the uncertainty, another day of not knowing. Is she alive? Is she safe? Is she being hurt? Is she thinking of us? Does she want to come home? These questions tormented Jessica, cycling through her mind during sleepless nights, during quiet moments when the rest of the world moved on but she remained frozen in that moment of discovery, that open window, that note. Birthdays came and went, each one a painful milestone. Alicia's 15th birthday arrived just 5 days after she disappeared, on September 20, 2019. How do you celebrate your child's birthday when you don't know where they are? Do you bake a cake? Do you light candles? Do you sing happy birthday to an empty room? Then came her 16th birthday in 2020. Still missing. Still no answers. Her 17th in 2021. And finally, her 18th in September 2023, the birthday that would legally make her an adult, able to make her own decisions, no longer classified as a missing juvenile but a missing adult. Holidays were marked with an empty chair at the table. Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, every family gathering had that absence, that hole where Alicia should have been. Photos lined the walls, images of Alicia at different ages, smiling, creating art, being a kid. Those photos didn't age, but Alicia was aging somewhere, growing up without her family. Jessica remained one of the most visible voices in the case throughout this entire period. She refused to let Alicia's story fade away. She understood something crucial, that in missing person cases, public attention can make the difference between a case being solved and a case going cold. So she used every tool available to her. She used social media extensively, creating posts about Alicia, keeping her daughter's face and story alive online. She posted updates whenever there was anything to share, even when there wasn't much new information. She shared old pictures of her daughter, photos of Alicia smiling with friends, images of artwork Alicia had created showing her creative side, her talent, her personality. These weren't just missing person posters. They were reminders that Alicia was a real person, a daughter, a friend, someone who was loved and missed. Jessica wrote messages full of love and hope directly to Alicia, as if her daughter might be reading them somewhere. She reminded her followers that miracles do exist, that she would never stop believing Alicia would come home. She asked anyone with even the smallest piece of information to come forward. Maybe you saw something years ago and didn't think it was important. Maybe you heard something in passing. Maybe you have a hunch, a feeling, anything. Please call. Please help. In interviews with local news outlets like ABC 15 and Fox 10 Phoenix, Jessica spoke openly and honestly about her fears. She talked about her concern that someone online might have influenced Alicia's decision to leave. She discussed her daughter's time spent on the internet, the hours Alicia spent gaming and chatting with people the family didn't know. She talked about Alicia's mild autism and how that sometimes made it harder for her daughter to navigate complex social interactions, to recognize when someone might be manipulating her, grooming her, taking advantage of her trust. But through all of this, through all the fear and uncertainty, Jessica never gave up believing her daughter was out there somewhere. She held on to hope when hope was the only thing she had left. She believed Alicia was alive, that she was safe, that somehow, some way, she would come home. The Glendale Police Department, led by detectives who had taken the case seriously from the very start, kept the investigation active even as leads dried up and the trail went cold. This kind of commitment from law enforcement is not always guaranteed. Some departments, especially in smaller jurisdictions or when resources are stretched thin, might move on to more recent cases, cases with fresh leads and better chances of quick resolution. But Glendale didn't do that. They continued to follow up on tips that came in sporadically over the years. Someone in Colorado thought they saw a girl matching Alicia's description at a shopping mall. Detectives made calls, reached out to local police there, tried to track it down. Someone reported seeing a young woman hitchhiking along a highway in Texas. Was it Alicia? Could it be? Each tip was checked out as thoroughly as resources allowed. The FBI remained involved throughout this period, particularly assisting with digital aspects of the investigation. The internet doesn't forget. Digital footprints can last for years. Investigators continued reviewing old online communications where possible, looking for patterns, looking for anything that might have been missed the first time around. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children helped maintain Alicia's profile in their extensive databases. They updated her information regularly, included those age-progressed images showing what she might look like as she grew from a 14-year-old girl into a young woman. These images were important. Someone might not recognize a current photo of a teenager if they're now looking at a young adult. But an age-progressed image could trigger recognition. Community support never fully faded, though it ebbed and flowed over the years. There were occasional vigils organized by people who had never even met Alicia but were moved by her story. Candles were lit. Prayers were said. People gathered to show Jessica that she wasn't alone, that the community hadn't forgotten. Flyers remained posted in some places years after Alicia disappeared. In windows of shops whose owners remembered the case and wanted to help. On community bulletin boards. In police stations. Little reminders that this case wasn't closed, that this girl was still missing, that information was still needed. Local media continued to cover the story around significant dates. The anniversary of Alicia's disappearance each September 15 brought renewed coverage. Reporters would interview Jessica again, update the public on any developments, remind people to keep looking, to keep hoping. In 2021, the popular true crime podcast Crime Junkie covered Alicia's case in detail. This brought a massive surge of renewed attention. Crime Junkie has millions of dedicated listeners, people who consume true crime content voraciously and often get involved in cases, submitting tips, sharing information on social media, keeping cases in the public consciousness. The episode about Alicia generated a fresh wave of tips to the Glendale Police Department. The phones rang again. The email inbox filled up. People who had never heard of the case before were now aware, now looking, now thinking about it. But despite this renewed attention and all these new tips, none led to a breakthrough. The investigation remained stalled. Detectives re-interviewed people from Alicia's circle whenever new information surfaced or when they felt it was worth revisiting old ground. Sometimes people remember things differently years later. Sometimes they're more willing to talk after time has passed. Sometimes a detail that seemed unimportant years ago suddenly takes on new significance. They kept monitoring for any patterns that might connect to similar cases. Was there a predator operating in Arizona or nearby states who targeted young girls online? Were there other disappearances that shared characteristics with Alicia's case? Law enforcement agencies share information, looking for these patterns, because sometimes solving one case can crack open another. But the reality was harsh and unforgiving. There were no confirmed sightings of Alicia anywhere. Not one single verified sighting in all those years. There were no financial trails to follow. If Alicia had used a credit card, accessed a bank account, applied for a job using her real identity, those systems would have flagged it. Nothing. There were no phone pings. In the modern age, cell phones are one of the primary ways missing people are tracked. Phones connect to towers. They leave digital breadcrumbs. But Alicia's phone, if she even had it with her, never pinged. Either it was destroyed, turned off permanently, or she'd gotten a new phone under a different identity. After the initial flurry of activity in September 2019, the case had become what investigators call a long-term missing person investigation. Still open, still prioritized in the sense that it remained on the books and wasn't forgotten, but without the urgency that comes with fresh evidence and active leads. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for Cold Case Model because what happens next in this case is something nobody saw coming. This story is about to take a turn that will leave you absolutely speechless. By 2022 and early 2023, the public updates from law enforcement were fewer and farther between. There simply wasn't much new to report. The investigation continued behind the scenes, but without breakthroughs to announce. There were longer gaps between press releases and media coverage. Jessica's social media posts during this period reflected a quiet strength that can only come from enduring years of unimaginable pain. She spoke of healing as a family while continuing to search in her heart. She talked about learning to live with uncertainty, about finding moments of peace while never giving up hope. She shared messages about faith, about the power of prayer, about believing in miracles even when everything seems hopeless. Detectives assigned to the case, including ones who had worked on it since 2020, stayed in regular contact with the family. This is important. It would have been easy for law enforcement to drift away, to stop calling, to let the family feel abandoned. But they didn't. They reassured Jessica and her family that Alicia had not been forgotten, that the case remained active, that if anything new came to light, they would pursue it vigorously. The file remained active in Glendale. There were periodic reviews of old evidence, detectives going back through everything with fresh eyes. Sometimes you miss something the first time. Sometimes a piece of information that seemed irrelevant early on takes on new meaning years later. They continued checking Alicia's information against new missing persons reports nationwide, looking for any connections, any patterns. And then, on a Sunday morning in late July 2023, July 23 to be exact, everything shifted in the most unexpected way imaginable. In the small town of Havre, Montana, a community of just over 9,000 people located near the Canadian border, hours north of any major city, an 18-year-old woman walked into the Havre Police Department around 11 o'clock in the morning. She approached the front desk calmly and identified herself. She said her name was Alicia Navarro. The officers on duty must have been stunned. The name Alicia Navarro had been in databases, on missing person lists, in law enforcement bulletins for nearly 4 years. Could this really be her? The same girl who had vanished from Glendale, Arizona, back in September 2019. The young woman explained her situation clearly and calmly. She said she had been reported missing back in Arizona years ago. She was now 18 years old, a legal adult. She wanted help getting her name removed from the missing persons lists. She said she was ready to move forward with her life as an adult and needed this resolved. The officers were professional despite their shock. They asked for identification, verified her information through their systems. They pulled up photos from the missing person reports, compared them to the young woman standing in front of them. The face was older now, matured from a 14-year-old girl into an 18-year-old young woman, but yes, this was her. This was absolutely Alicia Navarro. They asked standard questions to assess her condition and state of mind. Was she okay? Was she in any danger? Did she need medical attention? Was anyone forcing her to be there or controlling what she said? Alicia appeared to be in good health from what the officers could observe. She was unharmed. There were no visible injuries, no obvious signs of physical abuse or neglect. She was composed, articulate, able to explain clearly why she was there. There were no immediate signs of distress or coercion. She wasn't looking over her shoulder nervously. She wasn't showing signs of fear. She had simply walked in voluntarily and asked for help resolving her missing person status. The Havre Police Department quickly notified authorities in Glendale, Arizona. This was protocol for any found missing person, especially one who had been missing for years and whose case had received significant media attention. They needed to inform the agency that had jurisdiction over the original case. Word spread rapidly through law enforcement channels. The FBI was notified since they had been involved from the beginning. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was updated. After nearly 4 years of searching, of dead ends, of wondering and hoping, Alicia Navarro had been found alive. The Glendale Police Department publicly announced the development on July 26, 2023, 3 days after Alicia walked into that police station in Montana. They held a news conference that attracted significant media attention. Spokespeople for the department expressed relief and gratitude that Alicia was alive and safe. They emphasized key facts about her reappearance. She had walked in on her own. She had identified herself. She had requested help clearing her missing status. No one had found her through detective work or a tip. She had presented herself voluntarily. No charges were being filed against her for running away or for being missing all those years. She was an adult now, 18 years old, and from all accounts provided by Montana authorities, she was healthy and ready to take this step forward. But even as law enforcement celebrated this incredible outcome, the finding of a missing person alive after nearly 4 years, the announcement raised as many questions as it answered. How had Alicia ended up more than 1,300 miles away in a remote Montana town? What had happened during the intervening years? Where had she been? What had she been doing? Who had she been with? Why had she stayed away so long? Why did she choose this moment to come forward? And perhaps most importantly, had she been there voluntarily the entire time, or had something else been going on? As investigators in Montana began looking into the circumstances of Alicia's life there, they learned that she had been living in Havre for at least some period of time. Exactly how long remained unclear initially, but it appeared she hadn't just arrived recently. Reports later indicated that Alicia had been sharing an apartment in Havre with a man named Edmund Davis, who was in his mid-30s at the time. The age difference was immediately concerning to investigators. An 18-year-old woman living with a man in his 30s might not be illegal now that she was an adult, but what about before? She'd only just turned 18. Had this relationship begun when she was still a minor? Had this man been involved in her initial disappearance from Arizona? These were urgent questions that needed answers. To understand the circumstances better and to investigate whether any crimes had been committed, Montana authorities obtained a search warrant for the residence where Alicia had been staying, the apartment she'd shared with Edmund Davis. During the execution of that search warrant, investigators made a disturbing discovery. They found inappropriate images involving minors on electronic devices belonging to Davis. These were not images of Alicia, according to authorities. No connection was alleged between the material and her personally. But the discovery immediately shifted the focus of the investigation in Montana from simply processing a found missing person to investigating serious criminal activity. The images discovered constituted child sexual abuse material, one of the most serious offenses in both federal and state law. The possession of such material is a felony, and the nature of the crime meant that Davis would be facing significant charges. Alicia herself was not detained or charged with anything. This is important to understand. From law enforcement's perspective, she was the victim in a missing person case, not a perpetrator of any crime. She was treated as a found missing person, and arrangements were made for her to reconnect with her family back in Arizona. By late 2023, reports confirmed that Alicia had reunited with her mother, Jessica, and other relatives. The reunion happened away from media cameras, privately, as it should have been. This was a deeply personal, emotional moment for a family that had been torn apart for nearly 4 years. In a statement released through the media, the family expressed overwhelming joy and gratitude. They were happy and blessed that Alicia was alive and safe after so long. They thanked the public for their support over the years, for the prayers, for keeping Alicia's story alive, for never giving up hope. They asked for privacy as they began the healing process and worked to regain some sense of normalcy. Privacy was crucial now. They needed time to be a family again, to talk, to understand, to heal. Jessica later shared brief comments through intermediaries, not wanting to do extensive media interviews during this sensitive time. She said that the family felt complete again, that having Alicia home was the answer to years of prayers. But she also acknowledged that the road ahead would involve a lot of adjustment. Alicia had left as a 14-year-old girl and returned as an 18-year-old young woman. She'd missed 4 years of family life, 4 years of growing up together. There would be catching up on lost time, conversations that needed to happen, adjustments to new realities, and healing from the emotional toll of those 4 uncertain years. Alicia, now 18 and turning 19 shortly after in September 2023, had chosen to step forward on her own terms. This was significant. She hadn't been rescued. She hadn't been found by investigators. She had made the decision herself to walk into that police station, to reclaim her identity, to reconnect with her family. What that meant about her experiences during those years remained largely private. The reappearance brought closure to one chapter of this story, the chapter filled with fear that Alicia was gone forever, that she might have been harmed, that the family might never know what happened to her. That nightmare was over. Alicia was alive. She was safe. She was home. But it opened another chapter, one focused on understanding what had transpired during those 4 years. Where exactly had she been? All of that time in Montana, or had she been elsewhere first? What was her relationship with Edmund Davis? When did it begin? How did she end up living with him? These were questions that might never be fully answered publicly, questions that were deeply personal and potentially part of ongoing investigations. The Glendale Police Department kept their investigation active and open. This might seem strange when the missing person had been found, but there were still unanswered questions from Arizona's side. They continued working to piece together details, to understand the full timeline, to determine if any crimes had been committed in Arizona jurisdiction that warranted charges. Montana authorities pursued their separate inquiries related specifically to what was found in the residence during that search. The discovery of child sexual abuse material led to a distinct criminal investigation that would unfold over the coming months. With the family beginning their long-awaited reunion and Alicia stepping into a new chapter of her life by late 2023, the separate investigation in Montana moved quickly forward based on the evidence already gathered during the search of the residence. The material uncovered on electronic devices linked to Edmund Davis, images that constituted illicit content involving minors, provided Montana authorities with sufficient grounds for immediate action. This wasn't a case where they needed to build a circumstantial case or wait for additional evidence. The forensic examination of the seized devices had revealed clear, unambiguous evidence of criminal activity. In late October 2023, Montana Department of Justice agents, working in coordination with the Hill County Sheriff's Office, arrested Edmund Davis in a neighboring community. He was taken into custody without incident, meaning he didn't resist arrest or attempt to flee. He was transported to the Hill County Detention Center, the county jail, where he was held on a bond set at $1 million. That bond amount is significant. $1 million indicated that the court considered him either a serious flight risk, a danger to the community, or both. For most people, posting a $1 million bond would be impossible, meaning Davis would remain in custody throughout the pretrial process unless he could somehow raise that amount. Davis faced 2 felony counts of sexual abuse of children under Montana Code Annotated Section 45-5-625. Specifically, the charges were for knowingly possessing visual depictions of minors engaged in sexually explicit conduct. In simpler terms, possessing child sexual abuse material, child pornography. Court filings from the time provided additional details about the evidence against him. Forensic analysis of the seized devices had been thorough. Experts had examined hard drives, phones, tablets, any electronic device found in the residence during the search. They confirmed the presence of multiple such images, and according to the filings, some involved very young children. This made the offenses even more serious in the eyes of the law and the community. The material had been stored on devices in Davis's possession. This established his knowing possession. He had control of the devices. He had access to the material. The images hadn't been accidentally cached in a browser or temporarily downloaded. They had been stored, saved, maintained, and according to forensic evidence, accessed on devices he owned and controlled. In November 2023, Davis made his initial court appearance in Hill County District Court for his arraignment. This is the hearing where formal charges are read, and the defendant enters a plea. He was represented by a public defender, an attorney provided by the state because he couldn't afford private counsel. When asked how he pleaded to the charges, Davis entered a plea of not guilty to both counts. This is common in serious cases. Even when the evidence is strong, defendants often initially plead not guilty to preserve their options for plea negotiations or to force the prosecution to prove their case at trial. The presiding judge set conditions for any potential release, though with a $1 million bond and the severity of the charges, release was unlikely. Davis remained detained throughout the pretrial phase. The court cited the severity of the charges and flight risk considerations. Someone facing potential decades in prison might be tempted to flee rather than face trial. Prosecutors from the Hill County Attorney's Office began building their case in earnest. They received substantial assistance from Special Assistant Attorneys General assigned by the Montana Department of Justice. The state's resources were being brought to bear on this case. This wasn't just a local prosecution. The Montana Department of Justice considered it important enough to dedicate specialized prosecutors to support it. The evidentiary foundation they built was strong and methodical. This included detailed forensic reports from the Montana State Crime Lab in Missoula. These reports documented exactly what was found on each device, when files were created or downloaded, when they were accessed, and how they were organized. This kind of digital forensics can be incredibly powerful in court. It's not just about finding illegal material. It's about establishing a clear pattern of knowing, intentional possession. There were also earlier digital examinations that had been coordinated through Arizona authorities. When Alicia first appeared in Montana, there had been immediate questions about her situation. Arizona investigators had been involved from the beginning, and some of the initial digital forensics work had started then. The case was treated as a standalone prosecution. This is crucial to understand. Authorities repeatedly emphasized in public statements and court documents that the charges against Edmund Davis bore no direct relation to Alicia Navarro's disappearance or her time in Havre. They were clear about this. The charges were specifically about the child sexual abuse material found on his devices. They were not charges related to kidnapping, harboring a runaway, custodial interference, or anything directly related to Alicia. No allegations were ever made publicly that Davis had played any role in Alicia's initial departure from Arizona back in September 2019. Investigators never charged him with convincing her to run away, with picking her up that night, with transporting her across state lines. Those questions remained unanswered or at least not answered publicly. Similarly, no allegations were made that he had exploited or coerced Alicia during her time in Montana. The relationship between them, whatever its nature, was not the subject of the criminal charges he faced. This left many questions hanging in the air, questions that frustrated people following the case. But from a legal standpoint, prosecutors can only charge crimes they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. By mid-2024, plea negotiations between the prosecution and defense intensified. This is common in criminal cases. The vast majority of cases are resolved through plea agreements rather than going to trial. Trials are expensive, time-consuming, and risky for both sides. Prosecutors risk acquittal if something goes wrong. Defendants risk longer sentences if convicted at trial rather than through a negotiated plea. On September 20, 2024, exactly 5 years to the day after Alicia's 15th birthday and 5 years and 5 days after she disappeared from Glendale, Edmund Davis agreed to change his plea. In open court, before the judge and with his attorney present, he pleaded guilty to 1 count of sexual abuse of children, specifically possession of visual depictions of minors in sexually explicit conduct. As part of the negotiated plea agreement, the 2nd count was dismissed. This is standard in plea deals. In exchange for a guilty plea and avoiding the expense and uncertainty of trial, prosecutors often agree to dismiss some charges. Both sides also waived their right to appeal certain aspects of the eventual sentence. This meant that within the parameters of the agreement, neither the defense nor the prosecution could later appeal to a higher court claiming the sentence was too harsh or too lenient. The plea was entered knowingly and voluntarily. The judge confirmed this during the change of plea hearing. The judge would have asked Davis directly if he understood the charges, if he understood what he was pleading guilty to, if he understood the potential consequences, and if anyone had threatened him or promised him anything outside the plea agreement to get him to plead guilty. This is required by law to ensure that guilty pleas are legitimate. Sentencing was scheduled for several months later. This gap between the guilty plea and sentencing is normal and serves several purposes. It allows time for a full pre-sentence investigation report to be completed. A probation officer interviews the defendant, reviews their background, their criminal history if any, their employment and family situation, and makes recommendations to the judge about appropriate sentencing. It also allows time for victim impact statements, though in this case the victims were the children depicted in the illegal material, and they might not even know they were victims or be locatable. So the impact statements would focus more on the broader societal harm of such offenses, the harm to all children when this material is created and distributed, the harm to communities when predators operate. Both sides would have time to prepare their arguments. The prosecution would argue for a harsh sentence. The defense would argue for leniency. The judge would consider everything before making a final decision. The sentencing hearing took place on February 10, 2025, before District Judge Katie Snipes Roos in the Hill County Courthouse in Havre. These hearings can be emotional and contentious. They're where the abstract legal process becomes very real, where a person's future, sometimes their entire life, is decided. During the sentencing arguments, prosecutors laid out their case for why Davis deserved a significant prison sentence. They highlighted Montana's sentencing statutes for felony sexual abuse of children involving visual material. Under Montana law, these offenses carry a potential range of 4 years to life imprisonment. That's an enormous range, giving judges significant discretion based on the specific facts of each case. The prosecutors pointed to several factors they considered aggravating, factors that warranted a sentence at the higher end of that spectrum. First, the volume of images. This wasn't a case of someone who had accidentally downloaded a few images or had a small amount of material. The forensic reports showed multiple images, indicating a pattern of collecting and maintaining this material over time. Second, the nature of the images. Some involved very young children. In the world of these offenses, cases involving younger victims are considered more serious. The exploitation of very young children represents a more severe violation. Third, the need for deterrence. Prosecutors argued that sentences in these cases need to send a message to others who might be tempted to engage in similar conduct. The sentence needed to deter not just this defendant from reoffending but others from offending in the first place. Fourth, the protection of vulnerable populations. Children are the most vulnerable members of society. The court had a responsibility to protect them, and significant prison sentences for those who victimize them through creation or possession of this material serves that protective function. Based on all these factors, the prosecution recommended a sentence at the higher end of the statutory range. They wanted decades in prison. Defense counsel, Davis's public defender, argued for leniency based on different considerations. First, they pointed to Davis's lack of prior criminal history for similar offenses. If this was his first conviction, that's a mitigating factor under sentencing guidelines. Courts generally treat first-time offenders less harshly than repeat offenders. Second, they emphasized his acceptance of responsibility through the guilty plea. He hadn't forced the state to go through a lengthy, expensive trial. He hadn't put witnesses through the trauma of testifying. He'd admitted his guilt and accepted responsibility. That deserves some credit in sentencing. Third, they presented personal mitigating circumstances detailed in the pre-sentence investigation report. These might have included things like his background, any mental health issues, substance abuse problems, employment history, family support, expressions of remorse, participation in treatment programs while in jail, anything that might paint him in a more sympathetic light or suggest he could be rehabilitated. The defense likely argued for a sentence closer to the minimum end of the range, emphasizing rehabilitation over pure punishment, suggesting that their client could be treated and eventually returned to society as a productive member. The judge listened to both sides, reviewed all the submitted materials, the pre-sentence investigation report, the forensic evidence, the prosecution's recommendations, the defense's arguments. Then Judge Katie Snipes Roos made her decision. On February 11, 2025, the day after the sentencing hearing, Judge Roos delivered the sentence. 100 years committed to the Montana State Prison with 50 years suspended. Let's break down what this means because the structure of Montana sentencing can be complex. The total sentence imposed was 100 years. However, 50 of those years were suspended. Suspended means that portion of the sentence doesn't have to be served if the defendant meets certain conditions. So the committed portion, the part that actually had to be served, was 50 years. But there was more. The suspended 50 years would hang over Davis's head upon his eventual release. If he violated the strict probation conditions that would be imposed, if he committed any new crimes, if he failed to comply with sex offender registration requirements, if he violated any terms of his supervision, those suspended 50 years could be imposed, meaning he'd go back to prison to serve them. Most significantly, the court imposed a parole eligibility restriction. This is critical. Davis would not be eligible to apply for parole until he had served at least 25 years of the committed sentence. This effectively meant the earliest possible parole consideration would fall around the year 2050, assuming he received credit for any time already served in jail and assuming full compliance with prison regulations and no additional infractions. 25 years. Davis would be in his 60s before he could even apply for parole, and applying doesn't mean being granted parole. The parole board would have to evaluate him, consider his behavior in prison, assess whether he'd been rehabilitated, determine whether he posed a continued threat to public safety. Many inmates who become eligible for parole are denied multiple times before eventually being granted release. The sentence was severe, among the harshest given for possession offenses in Montana in recent years. It reflected the seriousness with which the court viewed the crime and perhaps the high-profile nature of the case given its connection, however indirect, to Alicia Navarro's story. The Montana Attorney General's office issued a press release the same day, February 11, 2025. The statement read, "This substantial sentence reflects the gravity of possessing and storing illicit material involving minors. Our office remains committed to prosecuting these cases vigorously to safeguard children and hold offenders accountable." Montana Attorney General Austin Knudsen added his own comments, stating that the outcome demonstrated Montana's resolve in addressing digital exploitation crimes. He emphasized that the state would continue to prioritize these cases and seek significant sentences for those who victimize children through creation, distribution, or possession of child sexual abuse material. For the Glendale Police Department back in Arizona, the Montana conviction added important context to their still open missing persons file. It didn't solve all the mysteries surrounding Alicia's 4-year absence, but it provided at least one piece of the puzzle. The man Alicia had been living with when she reappeared was now a convicted felon serving what amounted to a life sentence. However, the conviction didn't alter the classification of Alicia's case in Arizona. No additional charges related to her 4-year absence have been filed against anyone, including Edmund Davis. The official position remained unchanged. Official statements continued to describe her departure as voluntary at age 14. She'd left a note saying she was running away. There was no evidence of forced abduction. Her return was described as a self-initiated act as an adult. She'd walked into a police station on her own and asked for help. This frustrated many people following the case. How could a 14-year-old girl's disappearance be considered entirely voluntary? How could she end up 1,300 miles away living with a man in his 30s and there be no criminal charges related to that? These are reasonable questions, but the legal reality is complex. Prosecutors need evidence sufficient to prove crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. Without Alicia's cooperation in testifying about what happened, without digital evidence directly linking Davis to her initial departure, without witnesses or other proof, bringing charges would be difficult. JESSICA Nuñez and the family maintained a low public profile following the reunion and especially during the Montana legal proceedings. They released brief comments through media intermediaries around the time of Davis's sentencing. JESSICA expressed that seeing accountability in the Montana matter brought a sense of finality to one difficult thread of the story. Knowing that the man Alicia had been with was being held accountable for serious crimes provided some measure of justice, even if it didn't answer all the questions about what happened to her daughter. JESSICA reiterated her focus on what mattered most now, family healing, supporting Alicia through the adjustment period of being home, and moving forward with gratitude that her daughter was alive and safe. Whatever happened during those 4 years, whatever Alicia experienced, that was for Alicia to share if and when she was ready. JESSICA's priority was protecting her daughter's privacy and helping her heal. The legal resolution in Montana thus closed the primary criminal proceeding directly tied to the events following Alicia's reappearance. It stands as a distinct outcome, one that addressed serious offenses uncovered incidentally during the follow-up, while leaving the personal details of Alicia's journey over those 4 years as a private chapter for her and her loved ones. As the legal proceedings in Montana reached their conclusion in early 2025, the story of Alicia Navarro entered what appears to be its final public chapter, at least for now. Edmund Davis's sentence, 100 years in the Montana State Prison with 50 years suspended and parole eligibility only after 25 years, marked a decisive outcome for the separate offenses uncovered during the investigation. It provided a form of accountability in one area, holding someone responsible for serious crimes against children, while reinforcing that no criminal charges related directly to Alicia's disappearance or her time away have ever been filed against him or anyone else. For Alicia herself, now in her early 20s as of 2026, the years since her reappearance in July 2023 have been largely private, exactly as they should be. Reports from late 2023 confirmed her reunion with her mother, Jessica Nuñez, and other family members. That reunion, that moment when mother and daughter saw each other again after nearly 4 years, must have been overwhelming, filled with emotions impossible to fully describe. Joy, relief, love, but also probably grief for the lost years, questions about what happened, adjustments to who each of them had become. Jessica shared heartfelt messages of gratitude and relief with the public in the days and weeks after Alicia came home. She described the moment in simple, powerful terms: "My family is complete again." After a long and painful separation, after years of not knowing, after birthdays and holidays marked by absence, they were together. She spoke of the overwhelming support from people around the world who had followed the case, people who had prayed for Alicia's safety, who had shared her posts on social media, who had kept hope alive through vigils and media coverage, who had never given up believing that Alicia might come home. In one video update, Jessica emphasized that this difficult journey had what she considered a happy ending. Her daughter was alive. Her daughter was home. That was what mattered. She asked for privacy as the family focused on the enormous task ahead of them, rebuilding their lives together, catching up on 4 years of lost time, adjusting to new realities, and healing from the emotional toll of those 4 uncertain years. Imagine what that adjustment period must have been like. Alicia left as a 14-year-old girl, someone who had just started high school, who was still very much a child in many ways. She returned as an 18-year-old legal adult, someone who had lived independently, made her own decisions, experienced things her family knew nothing about. The gap between who she was when she left and who she'd become was vast. For Jessica, the daughter who came home was both familiar and a stranger. She had Alicia's face, Alicia's voice, but 4 years of experiences and growth had changed her. There would be so many conversations needed, so many questions both spoken and unspoken, so much to understand and process. Alicia has chosen to step away from the public eye since her return. This is absolutely her right and probably the healthiest choice she could make. There have been no major interviews granted to media outlets. No exclusive sit-down with a national news program to tell her story. No book deal announced. No podcast appearances. No further statements from her directly about what happened during those 4 years. She's entitled to her privacy. She's entitled to heal on her own terms, to decide what she wants to share and with whom. The public fascination with her case, while understandable, doesn't give anyone the right to demand answers from her. The Glendale Police Department's original missing persons file remains technically open, though there have been no additional developments beyond the closure provided by Alicia's safe return. Open files aren't unusual in cases like this. There might still be unanswered questions from an investigative standpoint, loose ends that were never fully tied up, potential leads that were never completely exhausted. But as of the most recent public information available in 2026, the case is resolved in the most important sense. Alicia is alive. She is well. She is with her loved ones. She is living her life. The nightmare of her being missing is over. The investigation in Arizona, while still technically open for any lingering questions, has not produced new charges or revelations tied to her voluntary departure at age 14 or her subsequent life during those missing years. It seems unlikely at this point that new charges will be filed unless Alicia herself comes forward with information that reveals crimes were committed against her. Looking back on the entire timeline of this extraordinary case, from the handwritten note left in Glendale on that September morning in 2019, through the long years of waiting and wondering, the tips that led nowhere, the age-progressed photos shared in hope of a sighting, to the completely unexpected moment when Alicia walked into a small police station in Havre, Montana, and identified herself. This case stands out for its rarity and its unusual mix of heartbreak and relief. It reminds us that not every long-term missing person story ends in tragedy. We hear so often about the worst outcomes, about remains being found, about cases that end with arrests for murder or terrible crimes. Those cases dominate the headlines because they're dramatic and conclusive. But Alicia's case is different. It's a reminder that sometimes, even after years, people do come home. Sometimes people choose to step forward when they are ready, on their own terms, as adults capable of making their own decisions. Alicia wasn't rescued in a dramatic law enforcement operation. She wasn't found through brilliant detective work, though the detective work was thorough and professional. She simply decided it was time, walked into a police station, and reclaimed her life. At the same time, Alicia's story raises important, thoughtful questions that many families and communities continue to grapple with in our increasingly digital world. How do we better protect young people navigating the online world, where connections can form quickly, where relationships can develop with people we've never met in person, where influences can be subtle and manipulative? The internet has brought tremendous benefits, but it's also created new vulnerabilities, especially for children and teenagers. Predators can reach into our homes through screens. They can groom vulnerable young people over weeks and months, building trust, creating emotional connections, isolating victims from their families, all without ever being physically present. What signs of potential grooming or unhealthy relationships should parents, educators, and friends watch for? Changes in behavior. Secrecy about online activities. Spending excessive time online communicating with people the family doesn't know. Receiving gifts or money from unknown sources. Emotional withdrawal from family and real-life friends. These can all be warning signs, though they can also just be normal teenage behavior, which makes it complicated. How can we support families during those agonizing periods of uncertainty when a loved one is missing, when hope feels fragile but must be held onto? The years Jessica spent searching for Alicia, keeping her story alive, refusing to give up, those years required incredible strength and resilience. Jessica Nuñez's persistence throughout those 4 years, her regular posts on social media, her media appearances, her refusal to let Alicia's story fade into the background, all of that played a key role in keeping Alicia's name and face visible. When Alicia decided to come forward, the fact that her case was still known, still active, probably made that decision easier. She knew people were looking for her, knew her family wanted her home, knew she could get help. This shows the power of community advocacy in missing person cases. Families can't do it alone. They need communities to rally around them, to share information, to keep cases alive in public consciousness. They need media to continue covering stories even when there are no new developments. They need organizations dedicated to helping find missing persons. Organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the FBI, and local police departments like Glendale demonstrated the value of coordinated, sustained efforts, even when breakthroughs seem distant or impossible. Cases can go years without a break, but that doesn't mean the work isn't important. Every tip followed up, every database updated, every age-progressed photo created, it all contributes to the possibility of eventual resolution. For anyone watching this video who has followed similar stories or who knows someone affected by a disappearance, the message is one of enduring hope. Miracles, as Jessica often said during those dark years, do exist. People can return home. Families can find ways to heal and move forward. And while some questions about those 4 years may remain private forever, while we may never fully understand what Alicia experienced or why she made the choices she made, the central truth, that Alicia is safe and surrounded by love, is what matters most. If this story has touched you in any way, if it reminds you of the importance of staying connected with loved ones, of monitoring your children's online activities without being overbearing, of never giving up hope even when situations seem hopeless, then it has served a purpose beyond just being a true crime story. Consider sharing resources for online safety with parents you know. Organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children have excellent materials about protecting children online. Talk to young people in your life about internet safety, about being cautious with strangers online, about the importance of telling a trusted adult if someone makes them uncomfortable. Consider supporting organizations that help missing persons and their families. These organizations operate on donations and volunteer work. They provide crucial services, maintaining databases, creating age-progressed images, offering emotional support to families, coordinating searches, and keeping cases in the public eye. If you or someone you know has information about a missing person, any missing person, not just Alicia, always reach out to local authorities or tip lines. Sometimes the smallest detail, something that seems insignificant to you, can make all the difference in an investigation. That person you saw somewhere who looked familiar. That conversation you overheard that seemed odd. That piece of information you've been holding on to because you weren't sure if it mattered. It might matter. It might be the piece investigators need. Thank you so much for watching this complete account of Alicia Navarro's case. This has been a deep dive into a story that encompasses nearly 4 years of mystery, heartbreak, persistence, and ultimately, a resolution that defied expectations. It's a reminder of both the fragility of life and the strength of human resilience. It's a testament to a mother's love and determination. It's a case study in the complexities of missing person investigations in the digital age. If you found this narration compelling, if you appreciate detailed timelines, respectful storytelling, and thoughtful reflections on true crime cases, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button. It helps this video reach more people who might be interested in these stories. Second, subscribe to Cold Case Model and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into cases that deserve attention. And third, drop a comment below. What case would you like to hear next? What unsolved mystery keeps you awake at night? What missing person case do you think deserves more attention? Your suggestions directly shape our future content. We're committed to bringing you well-researched, respectfully presented true crime content that honors the real people behind these stories. Cases like Alicia's aren't just entertainment. They're about real families, real pain, real hope, and sometimes, real miracles. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Stay safe online. Have conversations with the young people in your life about internet safety. Hold your loved ones close and never take for granted the time you have together. Support families dealing with missing loved ones. Keep hope alive. And remember that sometimes, even after years of darkness, there can be light at the end of the tunnel. This is Cold Case Model. This is the end of Alicia's public story, but life, thankfully, goes on. Thank you for being here.